So let's start with the first one here. This is from Linda. Do I fill in the CSS profile in each college or just one time only at Common App for all colleges that I apply? So first of all, if there are those of you who are not familiar with this, the CSS profile is effectively a supplemental financial aid application, right? So if you're applying to financial aid for colleges, you will need to fill out the FAFSA, which is the free financial aid form that the federal government uses. Some schools, though, will require the CSS profile, and that is an application that is accessible through your child's College Board account. This is not through the Common App, and it's not directly through each school. So if they already have a College Board account because they took the SAT, great. It's the same login information. If they only took an ACT, you would need to create a College Board account. So what you would do there is that you would then fill out the information. The CSS profile asks for a little bit more detailed information about your finances beyond just what the FAFSA would ask. And it's largely just so schools can decide how much additional institutional aid that you could be eligible for. Right. So I believe the fee it's $25 for the first school that you apply to. And then $16 for each additional school that you want the CSS profile to be sent to, right? So you are just filling out information for one school, though. It's not like you have to refill out the information for every single school. So that is somewhat convenient and very similar to that extent to a Common App, but it doesn't have anything to do with the actual Common application. So I put in the chat a link that actually you can search through to see which schools will ask for the CSS profile. And you can just search it like there. I think there's an option there that if you're a domestic student, you can filter it and have it show yes, just so you can see all the schools that do require it. Okay. I do believe we also have some financial aid seminars. That's not honestly my field of expertise. So if we do have, a guest presenter on specifically for that, you're definitely more than welcome to attend those. Okay. Next question is, when is the deadline to apply for Ivy League colleges and UC? Okay, that's a very good question, obviously, because a lot of students who are now seniors obviously would need to know these things. And even if you're a younger student, it's probably a good idea to know when these things are. So they're typically, most schools, if they have early action or early decision, will have an earlier deadline and, of course, their regular deadline. So for most schools, the early deadline is November 1st, and Ivies are very much included in there. The Ivy Leagues, though, might have slightly different deadlines for regular decision. It might range from as early as January 1st to some of them maybe having as late as like January 4th or 5th or 6th, right? It just depends on each specific Ivy League school. So it depends on which deadline you're trying to meet. One bit of advice, though, is I always urge parents and students to try to submit their applications a little bit earlier than the actual stated deadlines for a couple of key reasons. One is that there are times when the admissions officers are free even before the deadline to maybe start to take a look at the files. That might give you an extended look beyond what they might be able to do when all the applications are in there. It also suggests to colleges that you're not waiting until the last minute to submit your application. And probably more importantly, if the college does offer interviews, it's a great opportunity for you to be in the front of the line, because oftentimes these schools will then send out, when they have applications, they'll send it out to the local interview chairs that, and then they'll then assign them to the alumni interviewers, right? So when I used to do Harvard interviews, I think I used to get students as early as even like 2 to 3 weeks before the deadline. So it actually does help to be able to submit these things earlier, so you get a little bit of a head start in that process as well. Okay. Next, a few schools accept optional video supplements. Does it matter if it's not submitted? If they state that it's an optional component, it is definitely treated like a non-factor. They treat the rest of the application as complete, and they evaluate it as if the video component was not there. However, if your student definitely projects better through the video, maybe they're very likable and charismatic in person or in video, I think that's definitely something where you do want to take advantage of that, right? So these videos are not necessarily evaluated based on like things like production quality, so you don't have to hire someone to edit these videos or whatever, right? Although if you do want to showcase a little bit of your creativity, that's certainly encouraged, but it's not certainly what they'd be evaluating you on. Okay, so it's a good chance for them to know you. Many schools like Brown, that's effectively what replaced their interview. So they don't really offer the traditional interview anymore. They'll offer you a chance to have a video introduction. Some schools have gotten a little bit more, let's just say, creative with this process. They'll actually have interviews that you'll have like a few minutes to take a look at a question and then record your answer. You can replace or delete the answer if you want to, but it's a little bit more of like a video interview. So there's going to be slightly different kind of mechanism for it. Of course, some just have a traditional optional. If you want to upload a video, that's fine. Okay. If that's not asked for, I generally don't necessarily recommend that you submit a video. Unless you really, really feel like that's the best way to convey, your abilities or your qualities to the school. Okay. Next, if a student has already taken AP Physics C and got a 5 and is still taking the class this year, should I report the AP exam? Um, if they're a senior now, you can. Sure, because at least that way they can see it during the application process, because any APs that you have senior year won't really even be looked at for admissions purposes, right? It's just basically you're sending it in there, what do you call this, to the registrar's office effectively to give you credits. So if you do want them to evaluate that, I think that's okay, right? It'd be sort of not too different from, let's say, for example, self-studying for an AP exam. So it's not like that would hurt you, right? They won't necessarily ask, oh, why are you still taking the class? It could just look like you just, wanted to go beyond that a little bit. Okay. Next is, do I need to request a disciplinary record with the school? Will be shown on the disciplinary record that will be sent to colleges. That's certainly a conversation you're going to want to have with the school counselor, right? So I would suggest that you definitely want to make sure you ask if there is something on the file that what do you call this? That they want to, if the counselor says, oh, there's an issue and we will report it, then obviously there's not much you can do about it, right? If there's a disciplinary issue. So that's definitely a conversation you want to have with your school counselor. Next, when writing essays, should we be honest and we reveal that we're not the best at class, while we have some other good characters such as compassion or hard work to keep up? Um, okay, well, your personal statement should really be your best foot forward. So I don't know if you want to necessarily volunteer stuff about not being as good in class, because they'll see that in other ways, right? They're going to take a look at your transcripts. They're going to evaluate that. They'll have your teacher recommendations and your counselor recommendations. So I don't necessarily see that would be something you would want to just volunteer offhand unless there's some sort of context that you want to use that for, right? So I would say it's probably best to stand on the merits of your own accomplishments first. Um, Now, if it's part of the narrative that you're trying to craft, perhaps, right? If you're saying, hey, you know what? Classes weren't necessarily my forte, so I wanted to find other avenues that I could do to be able to help out. I suppose it can help with the narrative, but I wouldn't just offhandedly say, hey, I was not that great in school, because, at the end of the day, yes, colleges do encourage you to be honest, but when you're writing these essays, it is a form of self-marketing, right? You're trying to promote yourself and trying to put your best foot forward. So colleges will want to be able to kind of consider how you might fit into the community that they're trying to form, right? And in some ways, this is definitely not a place to be shy. It's definitely not a place to overshare some of your weak points. I guess it's much of the same logic that later on, when you're looking for a job as an adult, you're not going to want to volunteer weaknesses if they didn't ask you any questions about it, right? You're going to want to put your best foot forward and make it seem like you are the right qualified person for the job. Okay. And that's kind of the mentality that you want to take when you're working on these essays as well. Okay. All right. So I think that's pretty much all the questions we have for this evening. Okay, actually, there's one last, and I'll probably wrap it up with this one. Okay. So it says, my ninth grader school will be conducting the PSAT this month. Are the students' answers sent directly to the College Board in real time for scoring? Oh, no. Who scores the test? These days, because it's a digital test and there's no essays that needs to be physically scored, it's all done automated, right? So now, of course, for it to have an official score that's sent back to you, that's going to be later. It is going to be sent to the College Board, but it's different from the scores that you would need for the PSAT. PSATs aren't necessarily normally submitted to colleges, right? That is something, actually, there's not even a place to put it in your college application, right? And it's not sent either when you're basically sending in your official SAT scores. They don't really see the PSATs. The only time it becomes an issue is that hopefully, if you do really well for your 11th grade PSAT, that score then becomes sent to colleges or not the score itself, but rather that could be used to evaluate you for national merit consideration. But your 9th and 10th grade PSATs, just don't worry about it. It's just really a practice test. Colleges will not have access to it. So even if you crash and burn and don't do the best you can on it, it's not going to adversely impact you at all. Okay. All right. So I think that's pretty much it, right? Okay. Actually, there's one last. Let me see. Looks like this should be pretty short. I'll end with this one. Can students apply to Ivy League colleges with an ACT score of 35? Yeah, absolutely. Right. You don't need a perfect 36, right? A 35 should still put you for the vast majority of colleges in the 75th percentile, even most of the Ivies. Yes. Okay. All right. Wonderful
All
questions.
right.